New investigation into casualties of the Cold War and the scope of those injured or killed while working with or around nuclear material. That's the focus of a series of reports out today from McClatchy News. Reporters in 10 states spent a year chronicling and documenting what happened to workers in the U.S. nuclear facilities from the 1940s right up until today. Jeffrey Brown has the story, and he recorded this conversation a short time ago.
McClatchy's team found the federal government had never fully revealed the true toll of what happened to the men and women working at nuclear facilities. Back in 2001, the government set up a compensation fund for some of those workers. The investigation found that more than 33,000 of them have died from related illnesses. That's more than 4 times the number of Americans killed in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And there were more than 100,000 Americans diagnosed with cancer and other diseases after helping to build the country's nuclear stockpile over the decades. Lindsay is one of the lead reporters on the McClatchy team. She joins me now, and welcome to. I want to fill in the picture first. What kind of work and workers were most impacted, most exposed?
Well, these were workers at plants, more than 300 plants all over the country. They did everything from pipe fitting and production work, blue-collar work, to nuclear physicists and scientists. And we even found in our database some CEOs who ran the contracting companies that managed the plants.
You refer to this as a hidden legacy. It's a little-known casualty of the Cold War, but how much was known?
Well, this is what I found so interesting working on this project, which was that I feel like when we talk about the Cold War and the history of the Cold War, we often talk about it as though it was a war without any casualties, without any American casualties. And what we were able to do at McClatchy is we obtained a database from the Department of Labor for the compensation program, and we were able to crunch the numbers and analyze the data and find the number of people who had applied and then been compensated for illnesses and died. And so that told us that there were people who gave their lives as part of the Cold War.
And within the scientific community, within the government, over the decades, how much awareness, how much study had been going on?
I think that when this program was created in 2001, there had been some awareness in Congress leading up to that. And it was created through the efforts of the Clinton administration to compensate workers who had become ill. It started to become apparent that many of these workers had been exposed to dangerous substances, radioactivity, and other toxins without realizing it or without knowing the full extent of the health hazards that they were facing. And so once that started to come to light through some research of some reporters, the Washington Post and other places, there was pressure in Congress to pass a fund to compensate the workers.
Now, you went and talked to many of those workers, and you found a mix of pride in the work they had done, right, but also bitterness in some cases over what they didn't know. So we have a clip of one of the workers. He's from the Hanford site. His name is Tom Peterson, and he was exposed to levels of beryllium. Explain first what beryllium is, and then we'll watch that clip.
Beryllium is a hazardous metal used in weapons production, and if it's machined or worked with, it can produce a byproduct like dust that can be inhaled by the workers. And there was a long time where I don't think the full dangers of beryllium were understood. And workers have been exposed to this dust, and when they breathe it in, there are some people who have an allergic reaction. Right. And this creates scarring in their lungs so that they develop, many of them develop a serious respiratory disease from that can be fatal.
All right, let's look at that clip.
Well, I started working at Hanford in 1978 as an iron worker. Nobody knew they were being exposed to beryllium or what the consequences are.
So the beryllium hazards were not well recognized early on. The problem is that some people are susceptible to very small amounts of beryllium.
All of a sudden I couldn't finish mowing the lawn. I couldn't breathe. Come to find out that beryllium's all over the Hanford site. This legacy beryllium contamination that nobody knew anything about, that they kept quiet about. Your future not real bright, but it'd been nice to be told about beryllium before we found out at a meeting.
Now, this compensation fund has run into various kinds of criticism, right? It's not enough, some people think. There's too bureaucratic, some people think. And on the other hand, there's some cases where the suggestion is there's overcompensation because the direct link hasn't been proven.
I think that in order for Congress to create this compensation program, the Department of Energy did have to submit studies to show that workers in the nuclear facilities around the country were susceptible to higher rates of cancers and non-malignant diseases. One of the things we did when we looked at this data was we really looked at the government's threshold for deciding a claim was valid, that it was more likely than not that a worker had gotten sick from something they did on the job. And we used those numbers to come up with the death statistics.
Let me ask you finally, you're looking at past experience, but this is very relevant still, right? Because of a major modernization program underway. What lessons learned either by you or by, more importantly, I guess, by the government and by the people doing this kind of work still?
Well, we took a look at not just the workers from the past who worked on the Manhattan Project or the Cold War, but also right up to the present day. And what we found was that there were 186,000 workers since the program was created, who work in weapons plants and research facilities today that have been exposed to registerable levels of radiation just day to day. And some of those people have exceeded the limit that the Department of Energy sets as safe. Other workers we spoke to were concerned that they were told that their dosage from certain accidents or exposures was a certain amount, but they felt that they were either being lied to or that documents or records have been falsified. And we did find, when we reviewed contractor misconduct files, that there were some cases where contractors have falsified radiation records of workers right up until, I think the most recent case we looked at was 2013.
So an ongoing situation. Lindsay Wise of McClatchy News, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Two key federal agencies responded to the NewsHour after Jeff's interview. The Department of Energy praised workers for their sacrifices and said its safety record has improved due to better monitoring and new protective limits at its sites and those of its contractors. The Department of Labor said that its processing of compensation claims is faster now, with many of the cases resolved within 180 days. The department also said that it has paid over $12 billion to more than 100,000 people to, quote, compensate for their suffering.